Welcome everyone to Interview with an Architect. Today we have Ian Walker. Ian, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, I'm Ian Walker, architectural designer in Washington, D.C. I was born and raised in Phoenix, Arizona, moved to D.C. for college, and I've been out here ever since for almost 10 years now.
Wonderful. So what got you interested in the field?
Oh, like many of my colleagues I've heard, it started when I was young. It basically started with just a desire to shape the world around me. You know, like many kids playing with Legos, that was kind of a cool thing, right? But just knowing that I could one day possibly build my own house for myself and for my family, and possibly even bigger buildings for other people, for thousands and thousands of people to use for that would ideally last hundreds of years. I always thought that would be cool, a cool task to take on, something great to leave behind.
Wonderful. So what's your favorite part about being an architect?
My favorite part about being an architect is definitely being able to craft, every space that, the client asks of me, whether it's their home, they come to me and say, hey, look, we want you to help us design our dream home for us to live in forever. Or whether it be, a couple comes to me and says, hey, we want to open up a sandwich shop, and this is the first sandwich shop we've ever opened. And I'm like, let's do it, because something I like to tell, and I'll probably reiterate it later, is that, follow things that you enjoy doing. And, for instance, I love food, and I love, the idea of opening a restaurant. So I always thought it'd be great to get good at designing restaurants and to understand, what makes a great restaurant, what makes it an enjoyable experience in a restaurant. And architecture has a lot to do with that. The same thing goes with the home, what makes homes feel the way that they do, when you walk in. A lot of it has to do with warmth and fireplaces, or really, the people that are in it. So yeah, sometimes it goes beyond architecture, right? And that's why I bring in, people and food, because you want to design spaces that, house those things, right?
Very interesting.
Yeah.
How do architects make a difference in the world?
Architects make a difference in the world every day for a number of different reasons, right? Simply put, we don't keep the walls up, but we make sure that the walls are built the way that they should be, so that they do stay up. It's just kind of funny. It's a very simple thing. As an architect, I like to joke around. We develop this different vision, right? Like we can see through walls, we can see structure, we can see behind ceilings, below floors. We understand sort of the way buildings work, kind of the way, mechanics understand the way cars work, the way they see all the different pieces coming together. That's sort of the way architects see buildings. There's just a lot of moving pieces, if you will, that sometimes are actually moving and sometimes they're not so moving. And that's a good thing, right? We don't want our buildings to be wobbly. So just on a simple note, architects design buildings so that they stay up, right? But on a much larger scale, we help create, because it's much more than just architects. As egotistical as we may be, we help create communities. It's very important to not design dull spaces, to not design buildings with tiny windows. It's about designing buildings that allow light to come in, that make you feel good. Simply, from a kid to an adult, it doesn't really matter. You want to feel good when you're inside of a building, right? And architects have that great responsibility to help you feel good when you're inside a building. And I love that about architecture.
Wonderful. So you kind of touch on this a little bit, but what or who is your inspiration?
Oh, I have a number of different architects that inspire me sort of through their aesthetics and their design process, right? But just as a, down to the core of a person, my inspiration is really my parents, in a sense. While my mom really knows, the only thing she knows about architecture is what I teach her, which is a very cool relationship to have. But on the other side, my dad, while he's not an architect and didn't go to school for it, He has an eye for design, and he's always crafted his home in a way that was clearly thought out, and I appreciated that. And I wanted to do the same for my mother. They didn't grow up. I didn't grow up in the same under the same roof as both of them, so I always kind of wanted to help my mom, be like, "Mom, look, you could design our house like this way a little bit." So I was always kind of feeding her that, and it inspired me to become an architect so that I could again shape my own world the way I wanted to, with my own vision as a builder and as a designer.
Wonderful. So what is one thing you think all aspiring architects should know?
Mm. One thing all aspiring architects should know is to explore. The I think the best thing an architect can do is to just go and experience as many different spaces as you can, to go experience as much architecture as possible. Kind of like another cheesy kind of example is, you might see some of these celebrity chefs or famous chefs. They go, all over the world, kind of after their career, towards the end of their career, to try and taste all of these things, and just to sample this and sample that. The same thing goes for architecture. Ideally, you do it younger. You have to, develop your palate, or your, for the kids out there, you have to just understand, what makes a church, or what makes a sports stadium, what makes a really tiny house a tiny house, and what makes a mansion, and everything in between. How do you feel when you walk up to a building that's 300 floors tall versus one that's only 3? Build those different things, and you know go get a taste of it all, and that's go explore, would be my one piece of advice to every aspiring architect.
So a little bit on the same line, what advice do you have for kids interested in the field?
Yeah, directly speaking to kids out there, don't feel like have to be interested in Legos, or that you have to be interested in drawing, or that you have to be interested in shapes, even to be an architect, or to even pursue architecture. I like to tell kids, one, I'm just a big advocate of going to college in general, and now that I finished architecture school, I'm a little biased, obviously, but I would tell kids, think about going to architecture school, not necessarily just to become an architect, but that's a possibility when you're done. But it opens up, so many different avenues that I could go on and on about, but mainly it changes the way you think and changes the way you see things. You become the ultimate problem solver in every sense of the word. Because every day you're faced with 100 different problems, and they're not necessarily putting fires out, but they are, they're problems that you have to, solve. And sometimes they take drawing, sometimes they take math, sometimes they take just conversation with other people. And so, it's not all about, the vision of becoming an architect. Sometimes it's just about becoming the best thinker and best doer that you can be in this life, really.
So what do you tell students, or what's some advice you have for students that say, it's a lot of work, or I'm not good at drawing, or math is too hard?
Yeah.
Any
Lately, I didn't have this phrase when I was going through it, but I kind of wish I did. But I'm going to kind of pass it on. Is choose your heart, kids. Choose your heart. Think about all the hard things that you've either already been through or gone through, even at the age that you are, and think about all the hard things that you're going to go through. And quite frankly, it's okay, because you're going to get through them. So when I say choose your heart, when you're applying it to school, you're going to have homework. Understand that you're going to be in school most likely for 4 years at least, if not more, right? So just understand that the time is there. So don't worry about, don't let the fear get to you, because while you may not know me, I really do believe in you, and I believe you can get through it. And if it's something that you want to do, right? So just either stick with it and just find something that you love doing, and it'll be easy. You'll be fine.
And I can vouch for that. You do believe in every student you meet. So,
Yeah, yeah, most definitely.
so switching gears a little bit, how do you think history impacts architecture today?
Mhm. History, history happens every minute, right? It's an ever-changing thing. Like I designed something already that sort of made history, not necessarily in a grand scale. It's not in a magazine or a paper. You might not have ever heard of it, but it's in a neighborhood. It's a home that is now on a block that a family lives in, and so take that back as far as you want, 100 years, 1,000 years, however it may need to be. But it's a beautiful thing to look at, especially in architecture. We look at forms or different shapes of buildings, right? We look at the different structures. One of my favorites, just to kind of look back at, is the Colosseum in Rome. Um, it's just like what a magnificent structure, or even just simply put the pyramids in Egypt. Like kids, if you're not familiar with those, just look those up or have your parents show you those are real buildings that were built a long time ago. And you could ask me how and I could try to explain to you how, but the real answer is I don't know how. And it's through, they might have asked themselves, kind of like you just did about architecture school. It's gonna is it what do you say when it's hard? I don't know what to tell you other than to just keep going, because you had something in sight that you wanted to do. So just keep going with it. So that's kind of how history and architecture works. We just keep going. We keep building buildings as tall as we possibly can. We build them as wide or as long or as round as we can, as much glass as possible. Like we push it as much as possible so that we can shape history, so that we can write history. So it's history and architecture is a beautiful thing. And if you're a kid who loves history, there's a whole avenue of architecture that you don't necessarily have to get into the whole math of architecture or even geometry. You can just study architecture and teach architectural history, which is a whole beautiful avenue in and of itself. So
So going along with that, how do you see the world of architecture changing in 10, 20 years from now?
you know kids, I'm sure you might have heard it before, and I hate to just be that person, but the color green, right? It's a simple word, and some people just throw it around, and I'm not trying to throw it around right now. It's something to think about. I want our buildings to be green, in the sense that I want them to breathe well. I want you to, again, walk in and feel good when you go inside. It's not about, again, tiny windows. It's about designing beautiful buildings that last a long time and that don't hurt our environment. And so, just cognizant of that, and going forward, I think architects are going to think much more about the client. They're going to think much more about who are we designing for, not what are we designing. It's not about um, just how many bathrooms or doors or windows the building's going to have. It's who is it serving, and I can tell that question is being asked a lot more when we're designing. It's like who are we doing this for? One of the most important questions as architects. Who are we doing this for? And the reality is the answer changes in almost every community, but it's for people and it's for our planet, really, in no particular order. But yeah.
Wonderful. So is there anything else you want kids to know about the design world, or something that maybe we didn't touch on yet?
I guess my last touch on would be you know architecture. The word architecture or the word design is really, really all around you, kids. Like it's all around you. From the way that my desk is, that's holding my computer, to the room that you're in, to the bed that you sleep on, to the house that you're in, right, to the grocery store that you go to. Everything is designed, right? So you have the opportunity to decide if you want to help shape that world that you're in. And it doesn't have to necessarily mean that you become a architect. Like if you have more questions about, what does it mean to be a designer, I'd be happy to talk about that. But particularly architecture, like we get to shape the built environment, your homes, your schools, your, again, stores, everything around you, right? You can have a hand in the way it not only looks, but feels and operates. And that's just a very, simply put, it's a fun job. And I encourage kids now to think about how, like, what they would do differently, because I remember when I was a kid that like, I had ideas that I still have now that are, doesn't take rocket science. It doesn't take a whole lot of years of school to build these ideas. It's simple. How do you want to live? And ideally, we all want to live in a better world. So how do we achieve that together? And so I encourage kids to think about going to architecture school or some sort of design school to better shape our environment.
Well, thank you, Ian, for joining
Yeah.
us and for giving your opinions on everything and your views, and it's very helpful to our viewers.